the WhatsApp messages that we've been discussing was the first thing that he was asked about. Of course, Rishi Sunak saying that he changed his phone so many times, has changed his phone so many times since then. Of course, he's since become Prime Minister, that they are irretrievable, and nobody told him at the time that he should probably keep them because some of the most crucial decisions ever made in the history of this country were being taken, as we have seen throughout this inquiry, and a lot of the time discussed on WhatsApp.
You said although on occasion you use WhatsApp to communicate around meetings and logistics and so on, you generally were only party to WhatsApp groups that were set up to deal with individual circumstances, such as arrangements for calls, meetings, and so on and so forth. Is that broadly correct?
Yes, that is all broadly correct.
You don't now have access to any of the WhatsApps that you did send during the time of the crisis, do you?
No, I don't. I've changed my phone multiple times over the past few years, and as that has happened, the messages have not come across. As you said, I'm not a prolific user of WhatsApp in the first instance, primarily communication with my private office, and obviously anything that was of significance through those conversations or exchanges will have been recorded officially by my civil servants, as one would expect.
But he began his evidence with an apology to families who lost loved ones during the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. Yes, thank you for having me here today. I just wanted to start by saying how deeply sorry I am to all of those who lost loved ones, family members through the pandemic, and also all those who suffered in the various different ways throughout the pandemic and as a result of the actions were taken. I've thought a lot about this over the past couple of years. It's important that we learn the lessons so that we can be better prepared in the future, and it's in that spirit and with enormous respect for all of those who are affected that I'm here today, and I look forward to giving evidence in a spirit of constructive candour to help the inquiry with its deliberations.
Interesting. I wonder how much conversation there has been between Johnson, Sunak and Hancock, because they're singing from very similar hymn sheets, aren't they, and very different hymn sheets from the ones that everybody else is singing from, whether it's Dominic Cummings or Patrick Vallance or we're not going to hear from Simon Case, but the messages that he was so it's a great shame. We do wish him a speedy recovery. Too poorly to give evidence, and he was the cabinet secretary describing the mess in Downing Street as being absolutely unbearable, incomprehensibly awful, and something with which he considered himself unable to put up with for much longer. What was it? Accountability, professionalism and integrity.
That he said would be at the heart of his government, when he became Prime Minister.
And the same man is now asking us to believe that not a single WhatsApp message that he sent during COVID was pertinent enough for him to have formally retained it for the public record.
Or retrievable on any of his phones that he has had since then.
So we've had a former Prime Minister last week, the current Prime Minister this week.
Yes, and he began similarly to the former Prime Minister with that full apology to the bereaved families for all the decisions that were taken, the suffering that they may have experienced, and he said it's important.
Can I just quibble this apology? I don't think saying I'm so sorry this happened to you is I'm sorry that I made it happen to you. I'm sorry you've got a black eye. I'm sorry I gave you a black eye. Two different things. I don't think we can describe it as an apology. You can disagree with me, but I think he absolutely says, I'm sorry about the pain and the suffering. But he doesn't say, I'm sorry about my contribution to the pain and the suffering.
And that's something I observed with Boris Johnson last week. I mean, he accepted personal responsibility. He said, anyway, all the things were listed to him and he responded, yes, I accept responsibility. But then when he was questioned on his second day of evidence, actually, he hit back at quite a lot of those things and the decisions that were taken. And Rishi Sunak is taking a very similar approach. The government, he said, were following the science throughout. They did the best they can. This was a constant emerging threat, especially in March 2020, where nobody knew what was happening and it was happening so fast. And he insisted that they were guided by the scientists. I mean, he's being questioned chronologically. So we're not yet into the meatier bit of 2020, the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which came in August 2020. And then we've seen so much criticism about the decision to lock down and the toing and froing over that in September.
So are we still really in Boris Johnson's zone, even though it's Rishi Sunak talking about it?
Well, we're talking, yeah, absolutely. And he's been confronted with, for now anyway, I think Hugo Keith Casey has given us a flavour of what's to come after this lunch break that they're in at the moment.
You describe how there was obviously, throughout the currency of the entire crisis, a clash between public health epidemiological considerations and economic and fiscal issues, both by way of the economic considerations which had to be taken into account by the government, and also the vast economic and societal damage that would be done by decisions such as lockdowns. In that debate, which raged throughout the pandemic, what was the general position of the Chancellor of the Exchequer? What position generally did you and Her Majesty's Treasury take?
Well, I don't think I ever referred to it as a clash. I think I saw my role as Chancellor of the Exchequer as making sure that the Prime Minister had the best possible advice, information, analysis relating to the economic impact or consequences of some of the decisions that he was having to make. Obviously, the Chancellor of the Exchequer's role is to be responsible for the country's economic and fiscal policy and the financial services sector. So that was my primary responsibility in the role. And then as it pertained to the pandemic, my jobs were not just to design and implement economic interventions like the furlough scheme or support for public services and businesses, but also, as I said, to provide analysis and advice to the Prime Minister as he made his decisions. And more broadly, just touching on what you said at the beginning, Mr. Keith, as a senior cabinet minister, one of the consistent arguments or points that I made from the beginning throughout was just making sure that we collectively in the Prime Minister considered the totality of the impacts of the decisions that we were making. It wasn't, as I didn't ever describe it as a clash just between public health and economics. I think that's to think about it in far too narrow a way.
Chancellor, at the time, doesn't remember the moment the government that he was essentially one of the top three members of decided to shut down the entire economy and tell people to stay at home.
Yeah.
Oh, come off it.
Don't recall that
Come
meeting.
off it.
No, he said he can't precisely recall that meeting. And he has actually been completely contradicting all the other evidence as well, given about Boris Johnson's indecisiveness, going back and forth over decisions. Instead, he's blamed Sage, saying actually, when we changed our mind, it's because Sage changed its guidance. The reason why the Cheltenham Festival went ahead was because Sage hadn't told us to stop mass gatherings. The reason why schools were closed on March the 16th rather than a week or two earlier was because that's when Sage advised it, and he insisted the Prime Minister acted. Surprisingly, he's almost defensive of Boris Johnson, even though we know that the two of them haven't got the best relationship behind the scenes, and you know there's been a lot of friction politically between them. He's been very defensive of the Johnson administration. He said we always had an open line of communication, and it was my job as Chancellor to put forward the economic arguments, and I always had a brilliant opportunity to do that.